Uh, Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode of Scrubbing the Skies, the webinar series of the Institute for Responsible Carbon Removal at American University. As always, I am your co-host and Will Burns, and I serve as co-director of the Institute for Responsible Carbon Removal at American. And I'd like to welcome all of you to our event today. As always, all of you know, we have a kinetic environment when it comes to CDR. There's a large number of startup companies in this ecosystem, philanthropies, some efforts at government research and also governance of these approaches, roles for the nonprofit sector, the academic sector. One thing that we don't have really at this point is cohesive integration and coordination of all of these efforts. And that's been top of mind for a number of people, including our guest today. So I'd like to introduce him at the outset, and then I'll tell you what we're going to chat about today. Glenn Hampson is Executive Director of the Science Communication Institute, as well as Program Director of the Carbon Dioxide Removal Network, or CDRA Net. Uh, he has been spearheading an effort by 250 high-level experts in the realms of climate policy, research, and governance to try to create the kind of coordinating mechanism that we've talked about and an organic sort of creature that will help us to move carbon removal forward in the future. And so, what Glenn is going to do today is provide an overview of the work product from this, the so-called Vancouver Declaration, and then talk about the way forward. Uh, Glenn will do an initial intervention of approximately 25 minutes. I will then try to seed the conversation with a couple of questions thereafter, and then we will turn it over to audience questions. Because we weren't able to use our original architecture today, we don't have a Q&A box. So if you want to ask a question, please use the chat box and I will try to monitor it. And with that, I will turn over the podium to Glenn.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Glenn.
Will, and Justine for organizing this. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit about this. So speaking of share, let me get my screen going here. And there it is. Okay. So, oops. Let me try sharing it again.
That's good, Glenn.
Oh, I can't see it. Yeah.
Oh,
there it is. Okay. All right. So the Vancouver Declaration. Like Will mentioned, I'm going to talk for 25 minutes, but I'm going to start with the science. And since I'm assuming most of you are already up to speed on it, I'm just going to kind of skip over this. But and then the slides will be available for download later, so don't worry about it if I skip so fast that you can't read everything. So here we go. 2015, the United Nations enacted the Paris Climate Agreement, which countries hoped to keep temperatures well below 2 degrees centigrade, or 1.5 if possible. But as you know, we passed that 1.5 mark in 2024 for the first time, and chances are that we have actually passed it, since it's a 5-year average that we determine whether we have or not. It looks like we're more than likely we're beyond that mark already, and we've passed it roughly 15 years sooner than we thought we would pass it. This chart shows the temperatures over the last 175 years or so. The root of the problem, of course, is carbon dioxide. And it's not a bad thing. Our planet has a carbon dioxide cycle. Decomposition accounts for most of the CO2 that goes into the atmosphere. and then it gets reabsorbed by soils and trees and oceans and so forth. So not a sinister thing unto itself, but because over the last 100 years or so in particular, we've been putting more and more fossil fuels into our atmosphere. Roughly around 40 billion tons a year of CO2 now we're dumping into the atmosphere. It's harder for our planet to stay in balance, even for these natural sinks to operate. And the result has been increasing concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. The blue line is CO2 concentration, and the black line is how much we're putting in. And that concentration of CO2 has been the primary culprit behind the rise in temperatures. And then, of course, the bad thing about CO2 is that it stays in the atmosphere for hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of years. So it's a long-term problem. It's going to stay in the atmosphere and will continue to drive temperatures over time. Where we end up is really anybody's guess right now, because the models don't work very well after 1.5. So given that we have missed our Paris climate targets, and many of the NDCs aren't even being renewed at this point, the sort of the middle worst case is that we'll end up somewhere around 2.7 degrees centigrade higher than pre-industrial averages by the end of this century. But it could be higher. Temperatures are, again, the models aren't working very well right now, and hopefully it won't. I mean, 2.7 seems like a small number, but even 1.5 is not sustainable, and 2 degrees would be catastrophic. So we see even in our 1.5 world, much more intense and destructive forest fires and acidifying oceans and increasingly unlivable heat in the equatorial regions of the world. If we look calmly at the prospect of a 2 or 3 degree world, we're really not considering the impacts on the majority of the world. There are pockets of privilege in our world that are going to be reasonably okay, but for the vast majority of the world, it's going to be a much different planet. The feedback and tipping points from these temperatures are the next challenge that we're looking at. As, for example, the Greenland ice sheet melts and more fresh water goes into the Atlantic Ocean, into the salt water, there's a risk of destabilizing the Atlantic current. As forests dry and forest fires become more intense, there's, I think that the Canadian forest fires from a couple of years ago released somewhere on the order of 500 million tons of CO2, which was enough to wipe out the NDC for Canada. There's huge feedbacks that are happening. You may have read recently as well, for example, that in Greenland, as the ice melts and more of the coastal region is exposed, that algae is blowing onto the ice sheet, and that's accelerating the melting. So these changes are the next sort of input into this model that is going to make it more uncertain about where we end up. The socioeconomic impacts can't be ignored either. This is not just an environmental catastrophe unfolding, but if by 2100 we reach 3 degrees centigrade, that chart on the bottom shows how huge portions of the equatorial region of our planet will be unlivable for the majority of the year. So we're looking at not only migration issues, but we're looking at loss of food and water. We're looking at huge amounts of adaptation spending that probably won't even be enough to accommodate the changes that are happening. So all very depressing, sober. That's what's happening. How are we responding to that at the moment? We are, as you have probably experienced in your own work, experience something of a eco-fatalism state at this moment. Countries are retrenching, industries are retrenching. there's a principle in science communication that if you make it sound too bad, then people aren't actually mobilized to action. They just give up because there's a sense that they can't do anything. And even prominent voices like Bill Gates, and God bless the wonderful work that he's done over the years, but coming out recently and saying that in a world of finite resources, we really should focus more on helping people in the here and now instead of coping with this looming catastrophe. But the flaw in that logic is that the looming catastrophe is even going to be survivable for a lot of these regions. This isn't new, though. We knew this was coming. We've known since roughly 1900 that carbon dioxide was a greenhouse gas. And we've had sort of different relationships with that truth. In the mid-1950s, some scientists were talking about how cool it would be to increase carbon dioxide concentrations so that we could increase the agricultural output of the world. But by the 1960s and 70s in particular, as we noticed these concentrations were starting to spike, we saw the handwriting on the wall. So in the early 90s, the IPCC's reports were talking about the need for carbon dioxide removal in very plain language. But their recommendations were premised on this idea that we would start to reduce, that we would be smart enough to reduce our CO2 output, and that therefore the amount of carbon dioxide removal that would be needed would be smaller than now and needed in the more distant future than now. And this is kind of the key slide here. Despite knowing all this, despite knowing that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas and that we weren't meeting our targets, we have sort of handed the responsibility off for CDR to the private sector. All of our efforts to date have been private sector led. The financing, the research, deploying pilot solutions. Yes, governments have been involved, but the total spending between even governments and private is about the same as New York City spends in one 5-year period on road repair. We simply haven't taken this as seriously as we need to take it. And even though a huge amount of progress has been made and yeoman's work on the part of the industry for pushing this forward, it recently passed a milestone of 1 million tons of CO2 delivered. But since we need to remove somewhere on the order of 10 billion tons per year by 2050, by most estimates, we're still off by a factor of 10,000. And as well, most of these quote unquote removals are actually biochar, which is not removing, it's just preventing CO2 from going back into the atmosphere. So we have a long way to go. Today, we're able to absorb about 2 billion tons of this 40 billion through our intentionally enhanced efforts like mostly forest and soil. But the novel efforts are just a sliver. That's the gold portion there. And of those, most are biochar and biological solutions. So again, 10 billion, even though the state of CDR says somewhere between 7 and 9-ish by 2050. But surely those numbers are going to increase and the timeframes are going to become more urgent. The amount of 7 to 9 billion tons, you see it from the bottom chart there that puts it pretty much on par with the size of coal. And the top chart shows the distribution of those outputs across different countries. The dark blue is 2023, and then the green is historical. So lots and lots of carbon that needs to be removed from lots and lots of places. So this just screams of the need for international collaboration on this effort. So that's the background. The good news is that we know that CDR works. It's worked throughout the geological history of our planet. It's very effective. We know that we have lots of options for removing CO2. from direct air capture to biological solutions to mineralization and so forth. We know that CDR can help us reach our net zero goals more quickly, and the faster we reach those goals, the more we can reduce the damage that's being caused to our climate. We know, and UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program, recently said as much, that the only credible pathway for staying below 1.5, or in this case, staying below 2, is to use CDR. But there's still, resistance from the early years of the environmental movement that CDR is sort of a handout to oil companies. But we really need to get beyond this mindset because we're in a different reality right now. And without CDR, all the emissions reductions in the world aren't going to save us. So we know that CDR is the only credible pathway to get us back to normal. And there is a growing realization as well in the community that the market itself won't be able to scale without some sort of strong government involvement, whether that means mandatory markets or some other sort of government involvement. And governments, for their part, are mostly unprepared right now to act quickly. The responsibility for CDR is divided amongst many different offices from one country to the next. And there's also a lot of policy retrenchment at the moment. Uncertainty as countries recalibrate to this chaos right now. The U.S. induced and also economically induced this sense that, again, the eco-fatalism, that we can't continue to go down this road if we're not sure that what we're doing is right. So here's where we get to the Vancouver Declaration. We need to work on this with all seriousness and urgency, but there's a certain foundation that needs to be built first. And part of this will come through the Vancouver process, but these are the sort of the fundamentals that we need to do. One is develop more public support for CDR, and that it's not starting from scratch. There are a number of surveys that show that the public already supports bold climate action, even on CDR. We need to move more toward a climate repair mindset as opposed to emissions removal, because without removing the legacy pollution, we can't restore temperatures to their historic levels. And we need to do this because we can't think to ourselves that if we just reduce emissions, then we'll be fine staying at 1.5 or 2 degrees or whatever. That's not a stable stopping point for our environment. We need to get down below 1. We need to get to a stable stopping point. Broad point number 3, we need to begin talking responsibly about the upsides of CDR. Not going out there with a banner and saying, "Yay, let's do this." This is an intervention that needs to happen. But by using this intervention, we can reach our net zero goals more quickly, as I mentioned. We can spur the growth of industries that have employment potential. We can salvage traditional livelihoods like fishing and mining and logging that are affected by this rolling crisis. Save the cities that are going to be impacted by rising coastlines, drastically reduced adaptation spending in the coming decades. Broad point number 4 is that we need to create a new pillar for carbon dioxide and take it out of the mitigation basket, because right now it's just a small part of what we talk about when we talk about mitigation. So give it the unique and dedicated focus that it needs. Pillar number 5, I mentioned about how the responsibility for CDR is spread amongst many different government offices. And so as we develop this new pillar for CDR, countries also need to improve their capacity to focus on this so that we have better ability to have peer-to-peer interactions on this topic. And then the final holistic change to this approach is that we need more government involvement and leadership in this. And this isn't sort of pulling out of a hat. It's when you look historically at infrastructure development, it's always been led by governments, whether you're talking about the development of railroads in the 1800s or highways or electrical grids, sewage systems in cities or the communication systems today. These are all projects that required government involvement to help create standards, mobilize investment, create policies that work across jurisdictions and so forth. So it's kind of surprising that we haven't focused on that yet, but it's not too late, and that's the crux of what we're doing here. So now then, about the Vancouver Declaration. The big picture is, as Will mentioned at the outset, there are already hundreds of companies working in this space, many philanthropies, think tanks, governments, IGOs. The point isn't to add yet another organization or effort into this noise, really, but it's to help create a single unifying framework for action, some connective tissue where we can all start rowing in the same direction. And this is sort of the gap that we're trying to fill. And so in the fall of 2024, we convened a group of a couple hundred experts that were representing all different stakeholder groups and started talking about what this global policy for CDR should look like. And the outcome is the Vancouver Declaration, and it's named in recognition of the city where we'll sign this later this year. This is the first agreement that focuses solely on the challenge of carbon removal. And it's also the first to treat carbon removal as the key pillar that we're looking to build in the fight against global warming, and not just Article 6.4 sort of afterthought tacked onto some other agreement. It comes in two parts. The first is the declaration itself, which is a broad statement of purpose to work together. And the second is the policy framework, which is the nuts and bolts, details, guidance on markets and risk and accountability and communication and so forth. And that's the content that was contributed by this expert group. The declaration is voluntary, non-binding, soft law. It's intended to support dialogue between governments, encourage information sharing, promote coordination, and complement existing efforts, not override them. And it doesn't, on the right column, doesn't create legal obligations or require legislative approval and so forth. The main intent, as I mentioned earlier, is to connect the dots in this space, especially the government dots, so that we can begin seeing how everything fits together. And at the moment, when countries are considering what to do with CDR, it can be hard to know where to jump in because there are so many different pieces out there. But hopefully, as we connect these dots, we can see what the paint by numbers picture really looks like. And other analogies that might fit here, rowing in the same direction, singing from the same songbook, whatever. The main organizational structure will be a secretariat whose main purpose is to convene members and share information and facilitate exchange. It won't be the type of secretariat that has the authority to speak on behalf of all members or create obligations or set binding priorities or anything like that. The signing agreement will be October of this year in Vancouver. And between now and then, we're reaching out to governments to explain what this is about and see if they can get on board with the early conversations to figure out what the secretariat looks like and what we're going to focus on and so forth. So the last couple of slides here, what happens next? The point of this effort is not to have a debate forum where we spend the next 30 years trying to figure out what we can all agree on. It's a coalition of the willing who are coming together to take action. We really don't have the luxury of waiting another 30 years to get started on this. And also, this is not a sort of a one and done. It's not, let's sign this in Vancouver and then go home and celebrate. It's the beginning of a decades long journey to work together in common cause. And carbon removal is going to be the new normal for our world for the foreseeable future. So this is an effort to stand up, an effort where we can actually accomplish this. The short-term outcomes, ideally, will be that more countries will begin to work together, that they'll build this secretariat that can, in turn, build more capacity around this effort, and that as a result of this collaboration, we'll shoot off other little dandelion seeds, and other efforts will grow through more public enthusiasm for this, as more success stories start to spread and so forth. And then finally, in the future, this is what we're trying to accomplish, right? We want global carbon dioxide concentrations to stabilize. We want to begin drawing down these concentrations so that we can restore our Earth's climate to normal conditions. We want to ensure that climate-related suffering drops. We want to try to reduce this eco-fatalism that is paralyzing us at the moment, and attract more enthusiasm and engagement for participating in climate policy. And along the way, hopefully we'll help develop a new and robust global carbon removal industry to accomplish this, and even create new pathways for more cooperation on other issues. So not small ambitions, but I think totally within reach if we can all work together. That is my contact information. Please do reach out if you have any questions or if you want to get involved. And then in the annex to this report, this is the declaration. And this is the main points of the framework. You can actually see the whole thing again from our website, and the proposed bylaws and some references. And Will, that's it. Cross the finish line on that.
All right. Okay. Thanks so much, Glenn. And I'd like to encourage everybody to populate today, not the Q&A box, the chat box. If you have questions for Glenn, but I'll start with a couple of initial questions. One question, Glenn, at some point in your presentation, you said we want to erect a new pillar, right, for CDR, and I think your rationale was we don't want it to get, I guess, eclipsed under the broader rubric of mitigation. One question I had as a lawyer is when I look at the Paris Agreement, right? The essence of the NDCs, not the only requirement, but certainly the essence of the NDCs are mitigation requirements, right? And mitigation is defined as balancing sinks and sources, right? So it seems to necessarily encompass carbon removal within the definition of mitigation. Do we want to, from a strategic perspective, tell the parties that CDR is not a form of mitigation?
That's an interesting question, and I haven't thought about that before. I don't know what happens at the COP level in that regard. The point of this agreement is to create a coalition of the willing governments who recognize the need for CDR and are willing to work together. How that flows into what happens with with those other conversations is a good question. I think my own personal observation is, for what it's worth, there has been sort of a race to the bottom in the mitigation world in terms of just finding the easiest way to check that box. So whether that's cheating and counting the oceans that surround your continent as an offset, or the forests that already exist as an offset, or the sorts of fake accounting that's been going on to try to make it look as though we're accomplishing these goals when in fact we're not. That incentive is still going to be there because it's cheap, it's fast, it's easy, it makes us look good, but we're not really doing anything as far as carbon dioxide removal goes. So if we can set up sort of a separate enterprise that works in the real world and is taking this problem seriously, then that's kind of the angle that I'm coming at it from there. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, there look like there are plenty of questions in the chat already, so I'm gonna move directly to those now. First is just a request. Glenn, can you post your contact details again?
Oh, yeah. In the chat?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Typing now. Okay.
Okay. All right. First question, who's the main audience for the declaration? Do you see this as being primarily for national governments, IGOs, private companies?
The primary audience that we're reaching out to at the moment is governments at all levels. So not just national governments, but we're including subnationals as well. So states, port authorities, regional governments, local governments, everybody has a stake in this. And it's interesting that I think many of the most interesting movers are going to be at the subnational level right now. So, for example, been having some fun conversations with Washington State and Oregon and California. Washington and California, as you know, recently signed an agreement on the cap and invest regime, and it's important to understand that even though countries can pass these regulations about what to do, it's going to be the subnationals who are actually responsible for the permitting and the mobilizing the people to work in these enterprises and so forth. So but it's mostly governments at this point. And that's sort of the value added to this conversation, if you will. And if we can get lots of governments interested and working together on this, then I think it will naturally attract the industry partners that are going to be needed to actually make this vision real. So,
okay. Well, that leads logically to this next question, which is who's signed on so far? And then there's a second question. Do you have a draft of the MRV framework that the participating entities might eventually evaluate?
Yeah. So the second one first, the actual policies are going to be designed by the participants, but the framework that the CEDRANET participants recommended is in the framework, which again is available from our website. There's the declaration, the statement, the general statement of intent to work together, and then details on the back. But it's not a detailed framework. It's just these are the general guardrails, if you will. And Will, what was the first part of the question?
First part of the question is who's signed on so far?
I can tell you that there are about 8 governments that are actively looking at it right now, but I can't tell you who. The only one who has formally agree to Sierra Leone. So kudos to them, and I hope that others follow in their suit soon. But we've only been reaching out for about a month right now, so it takes time for requests to make their way through the government offices and find their way to the right desk. So hopefully more announcements in the near future.
What kind of feedback, if any, or what kind of questions have you been getting from government folks that you've been contacting? What's the process?
It's sort of at a high level. There haven't been specific questions, but just the sense that I'm getting from the pushback right now. Not pushback is the wrong word, but it's a very deliberate process. Even though this is simply a declaration, it's soft law, it doesn't require legislative approval. There's a lot of care being taken to make sure that this is something that aligns with the country's priorities. Do they really want to go there? In some cases, the feedback has been, well, the technical experts in the country can't get ahead of the political voices, so make sure that they have that approval. And then in some cases, it's been the reverse, where a minister will say, we're completely on board with this. I'm going to delegate this to the technical person. And then the technical person isn't sure. So, and again, it goes back to the fact that this isn't really a very cultivated topic yet.
Right.
In governments, there may be just a handful of people who are working on it on behalf of an entire government. It's not like environmental policy writ large. It's a niche industry, and it could be in an energy office, or it could be in an environment office, or there really isn't anybody who's speaking for the whole government yet on these issues for the most part. And so it takes prudence and patience for these people to have to check with their peers in these different offices to make sure that this is the right thing to do. So over time, and this is part of the goal, right? Over time, that capacity for working together and for speaking as one will hopefully increase dramatically. But for now, it's still very much a fragmented specialty.
Yeah. I mean, I think if nothing else, if assuming you can get broad outreach, right, it'll be a good process to socialize. A lot of governments just haven't thought about this, full stop.
Right.
But it's also a bit of chicken or egg too, right? There's not that many people working on it now, and so it's hard to get folks to say we should be.
Well, and that's maybe the most important part that you put your finger on there. There is a lot of chicken and egg going on here. A lot of countries will ask who else has signed. Not because they're not interested, but because there's safety in numbers in this issue right now.
Right.
And if other countries are doing it, then it makes the decision easier. So I'm really encouraging the heavy hitters who have been part of this effort so far to signify publicly their support and their involvement here, so that it makes it a safer space for others to get involved.
Okay. All right. Next question. You mentioned the declaration's non-binding and doesn't set a target, but it was also mentioned that you seek to restore carbon levels to, quote, their natural levels, following up on the repair and restoration ethic. Is there an implied concentration target from that methodology?
I suppose I should walk that back. That's me. It's not the group talking there. The reality is that's what we need to do. Carbon dioxide levels have been increasing since humans have been on this planet. I mean, when you look at the history of civilization, every civilization has burned trees to whether it's to herd animals or to clear for vegetation or whatever. So we've gradually ticked up the CO2 concentrations in our atmosphere for many thousands of years, but it's only really started to become noticeable of late. We can't stay at 1 degree centigrade above pre-industrial levels. That's a slow melt for Greenland. 1.5 is a faster, 2 is within our lifetimes. So I think sort of implied in this is that when we develop the tools for CDR, when we develop the ability to scale CDR, that is, we need to have this conversation as a global community about what those targets are and how quickly we try to get to them. It's morally, ethically reckless to not do that, to just say that we're just going to remove 2 or 3 billion tons because who wants to get the earth back to zero. So, but it's a conversation to be had at a later date. Step one is to develop the capacity to do it. So, and there are other conversations along those lines that we need to have at a later date. Not CDRNet, but we as in the global community. Do we need to also prepare emergency measures like cloud seeding or albedo enhancement and so forth? Do we need to have these in our back pocket to prevent worst case scenarios from unfolding? So.
Yeah, we'll let somebody else address that.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So, next question. How do you think we could best engage the developing world as active participants in CDR?
It's the primary focus of my outreach at the moment, because the developing world is going to bear the brunt of this, of the impacts. You recall that one slide that showed the majority of the equatorial regions of our planet are going to be unlivable by the year 2100.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
but do you get I don't know how much, again, granular responses you've gotten, but do you have governments when you bring this to them say, well, this should be the responsibility of the developed world, right? That
no,
visited these thresholds on us.
No, that's sort of a cop dynamic, I think, and I hope it doesn't raise its head here. It's not to say that it's not a legitimate perspective, but we have a challenge that we have to face as a global people to get this figured out as soon as possible. I think it would be tragic if we spend the next 20 years debating on, who should pay and who should bear the brunt of this. It's really something that we need to just join hands with and work together now as quickly and as safely as we can. It's not, if we get sort of sidetracked into this eddy of conversation about liability, I guess it's going to delay us for another 20, 30 years. So.
Couple of questions about methane, right?
Yeah.
Should methane removal be part of the equation? Should it
Yeah.
not be maybe methane net?
Right. Yeah. That conversation came up early on in the CDRNet conversations, and the recommendation from the group was to focus just on carbon dioxide because it's completely different undertaking than methane removal, except for the philosophical aspect of it. Different stakeholder groups, different technologies, and so forth. Yeah, we're focusing just on carbon dioxide removal, and we'll support however we can the methane removal efforts that are also out there working together. If that means joining forces at a later date, that's totally up to the group. But for now, we're just CDR.
Okay. Next question. You've already mentioned that you're beyond looking at governments, that you're looking at subnational actors. I guess this question was how granular you're getting in that context. The question was, do you see cities, towns, and municipalities as good candidates to sign the declaration, or is that smaller scale than you're looking for in general?
Absolutely. Absolutely, they are. We've already reached out to a number of cities, and hopefully they'll come on board. They're active in all kinds of climate work. Cities like Vancouver, Seattle, Portland, already doing a huge amount of things with regard to climate. CDR is not exactly in their wheelhouse, but the impacts of climate change are going to affect cities more so than especially coastal cities. They have a lot at stake here. So to the extent that they can help support whatever is necessary along these lines, I'm not sure what that would be off the top of my head, but there may be sort of siting, permitting sort of things that they can help expedite. Or I don't want to speak sort of extemporaneously about this, but there are organizations of cities like C40, for example, that are already actively involved in this. So yeah, we look forward to their involvement.
Okay. Do you or the Vancouver Declaration seek to engage with the parties to the London Convention and Protocol, the main international regulatory framework addressing marine CDR, and currently working to further advance regulation?
There are a number of tangents to this that need to be picked up by the experts. I think with regard to London, huge impact on ocean CDR policy. So I'll leave it to the experts in that in the group to figure out how that all connects.
But have you been in your outreach? Have you been seeking to interface with some of those kinds of treaty regimes, for example?
Not yet. Not
Okay.
yet. Yeah, not yet. Yeah, but we do have the experts involved who know all about them and how they are currently either stymieing CDR policy or sort of throwing a wrench into the works, or how they need to be updated to better reflect the realities of CDR and so forth. So there's some serious conversations that need to be had in that regard.
This is a comment or more of a question. Can we discuss the scale and time pressures that are pressing on the components of this discussion?
Well, it's the scale and is changing every year. It's we didn't think we would be at 1.5 this fast, and it's really anybody's guess whether we're going to end up at 2.7 by 2100 or much higher. I think that the time pressure is real. It's no longer this abstract that we need to sort of gradually reduce emissions so that someday we're going to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. The worst impacts are steamrolling on us as we speak. So the question really is, I think, what's it going to take for governments to really embrace the need for this as quickly as possible, because we're still in this mindset that if only we cut emissions, right? If only we do a little bit more green energy conversion, if only we do these sort of tangential things that are going to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that we put into the atmosphere, then we'll be okay. But that's not the case. The carbon dioxide that's in our atmosphere is not going anywhere. And even at the concentrations that it's at, it's going to keep increasing temperatures over the next several hundred years. So are we okay with going from 1.5 to 2.7 to 4? Is that something that we've said is okay to happen? I think that the magnitude of the rolling disaster here really hasn't been adequately communicated yet to governments, and the entire mindset of COP about reducing emissions and focusing relentlessly on reducing emissions is something that needs to change in the coming years, and not coming decades either. It needs to change in the coming years. So there are groups within the CDR community who are working to change that. The Negative Emissions Platform convened a Blue Zone Pavilion last year at COP to help sort of raise awareness of CDR, but we need much more like that to really change the conversation around what needs to be done and how quickly. But the scale and the magnitude are enormous, and they're underappreciated at the moment.
There's a question was kind of related to that, which is your interface with folks like the Negative Emissions Platform, the Global Carbon Harvest Coalition, and so forth. Have you been talking to those groups, and is there any
Absolutely.
sense of creating kind of a broader sort of
Absolutely.
coalition as
Yeah,
opposed to
absolutely.
proceeding
Yeah,
parallel?
they were all part of the CDRNet conversations, but and at various points since the Vancouver Declaration was drafted, we've convened different groups of experts together from that group, subsets to help fine tune things. And then going forward, the Negative Emissions Platform folks, Chris Sherwood will be a permanent representative on the advisory group for the Vancouver Declaration as it rolls out, along with members from several other key, and yourself, Will, representing your organization. Going forward, these groups will help advise the rollout of the Vancouver Declaration and help make sure it stays connected to the right people and pursuing the right sorts of objectives. So, but yeah, it's connecting the dots is really key here. It's not about reinventing the wheel. It's about connecting the different experts and organizations in the space so that we become greater than the sum of our parts.
Great. If you didn't see this in the chat, I was thinking about this also. The CDR Cities Initiative. Have you
Yeah.
spoken to them?
Christian Danute. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
reached out to him as well. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
great. Um, Next question. How does the declaration harmonize with UN Sustainable Development goals? Should this be integrated to build one larger effort?
I think that would be brilliant. Right now, it taps all kinds of SDGs. I mean, without, again, going back to where we're focusing sort of relentlessly on emissions reductions, thinking that that's the silver bullet to save us. But if we can get CDR scaled to where it's actually making an impact on keeping temperatures in check, then it's checking all the SDG boxes. It's climate, water, health, and so whether that can get actually integrated into or set out there with the SDGs. I don't know how much longer the SDGs are going to be around as a standalone. The UN sorts of reinvents that every 10 years or so, but we do have UN involved. UNEP is a partner in this effort, and so maybe they'll throw their weight around and see how this can sort of get formalized into the UN processes.
Let's see. Next question, simple one. Is there a list of names of those who put the declaration together?
Not publicly. There is a list of organizations that have been involved, but it's not something that we make public because we wanted to respect the privacy of the people who did that. I can check with the group. I've had this question before. The intent of that group wasn't to be a public facing group, but it was to be Chatham House sort of rules where they can speak frankly with each other about these issues and exchange perspectives and confidence and come up with a good plan. So no, there's not a public. There is a publicly available list of the people who are going to be permanent advisors and supporters and so forth. But quite a number of individuals and representing a huge variety of organizations contributed to this. So, but not one that I'm going to make public without their consent. So yeah.
do you contemplate that when you move to the next stage that whoever's engaged in the process will be
Yes,
disclosed publicly?
yes, absolutely, absolutely, yeah, yeah. But I don't mean to sound coy about the making the other list public though. But let me check with the participants, and if they're okay with having their institutions be made public, we can do that for sure.
Okay. There were a couple of comments in here which I would agree with, which is about the need for a public education campaign.
Yes.
What role do you contemplate, if any, within the work of the of CedroNet or the Vancouver Declaration
Yeah,
for that kind of campaign? It's
that'd be
ambitious, it's expensive, it's difficult.
yeah.
Other than that, it's easy.
Right. We know a lot about science communication now that can help with that effort, and there are some practitioners in this space who are just knocking it out of the park as far as that goes. So engaging them would be a priority as well. Yeah, public outreach is going to be important. I kind of quickly skipped over in one of the slides about how public opinion currently supports uh, bold climate action. So the public is not, I think the public is farther along on this than politicians are at the moment. Politicians are still sensitive to the fact that this doesn't resonate very well with some audiences who are still thinking that CDR is either geoengineering or it's a giveaway to oil companies or something like that. So, but the public knows that, in order to get from point A to point B, you got to do something, and they don't want to kind of just jawbone about it for another 20 years while things get worse. So,
But
yeah,
do you think most of them, or even a sliver of them, know about this specific approach, right? Carbon removal, right? Because our experience as an institute is it's a few percentage points, right?
it is.
Or sometimes when we talk to people, what they think is carbon removal,
Yeah,
they're defining as solar energy, or
yeah,
they're defining it as CCS,
yes,
right?
right. Um, I think I'm trying to think. There's one organization that did a survey. I can't tell you who it is because it was sort of a confidential, but they found that once the public that they were engaging understood what
All
the issue
right.
was, what it is they're trying to do, and described it in layman's terms and not scientific terms, not used terms like enhanced rock weathering, but described what it was that they were doing. Then they said, oh, yeah, okay,
Hmm.
we'll support that. So it's still sort of a sci-fi thing for a lot of people, but once they're aware of it and aware that when we do this, then it means that um, these traditional industries are going to stay around, that the you know the ocean based the fishing that community relies on is going to stick around because the oceans are going to stay safe. um, it makes a lot of sense to people. It's not doesn't raise red flags the way that we think it might from our current vantage.
Yeah. Of course, that may change once we talk about cost and things like that, right? Don't want to get too.
Well, what's interesting to me about this anyway is that the wide variety of options that are available to us. When you look at the Los Alamos lab, did a report a couple of years ago called uh, the roads to removal. I'm sorry, I was blanking on it there. Jennifer Petridge, the lead editor on that, who will be speaking at the conference. But in the roads to removal report, it focused just on the United States, but it outlined how there were many different options available depending on the region. So for Northern California, you focus on biomass approaches. For Eastern Washington State, where I'm at, you can use direct air capture because we have these basalt underground storage areas and huge amounts of renewable energy available and so forth. So an assessment like that globally hasn't been done yet. And I think that would be an interesting sort of first step to do. What is where is the potential? And then once you identify what that potential is, then you can mobilize capital for those different investments and figure out where the greatest return on investment is going to be and so forth.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a good place to end. We have reached the top of the clock, and I'd like to thank Glenn again for presenting the declaration to us. And thanks to our audience, as always, for your thoughtful
Thank you.
questions. We will be back next month, and I hope a lot of you can join us. And until then, we say goodbye.
Thank you.